Hi, I'm Ted Haptegaber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see.
Good to see everybody, particularly those watching online because of the wonders of the internet.
See? Something that you were one of the early pioneers of course, with AOL,
Yep.
which was a visionary, was the most visionary endeavor at the time, and still to this day is a very big part of our lives. So now you're doing something similar once again at the forefront of another mission, which is the rise of the rest. And so I'm going to ask you, how did you come up with this idea, if it's an idea, and how'd you come up with it, and how does it work? And
Well, first of all, it's great to be here and great to be with you, Brian. It's been a fan of yours for, like many people, for many years, and particularly like the fact that you would just call up people to learn about them and
cold call them.
just cold call them, say, I'd just like to meet you and ask a bunch of questions, and then obviously turn it into a book, and it's fabulous. So on Rise of the Rest, I'm an entrepreneur. You mentioned in the introduction, mentioned AOL. Started that 37 years ago, so it was quite a while, and it was a struggle to get started and a struggle to scale it up, in part because we were located in Virginia, which was at the time not viewed as really a great startup city. And so that was an experience just trying to get people to pay attention, try to get people to invest, try to get people to leave big companies to join our little company. And it was really kind of it was hard, but eventually we broke through. So that kind of stuck with me, that there's something about entrepreneurship that's important, but it's harder depending on where you are located. And then I was asked, as the introduction said, to lead this effort, a White House effort called Startup America, about a little over a decade ago. And I then learned something that I didn't really fully understand, which is that, number one, most new jobs in this country are created by new companies, startups, and that 75% of venture capital goes to just 3 states, California, right, New York, and Massachusetts. So if you're not in one of those states, you're disadvantaged. So that then led us to launch this effort called Rise of the Rest, really trying to support the cities all across the country, to support the entrepreneurs in those cities all across the country. So they have ideas, they too have the opportunity to build them into companies. It started with some bus tours, and then we launched an investment fund, and as I spent a good part of the last decade traveling around dozens and dozens of cities, meeting hundreds and hundreds, I guess thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs. I just wanted to tell some of their stories because I found them remarkable. I found the places they were building these companies kind of would be surprising to most people, and I felt their stories needed to be told, so hence the book.
How long did it take you to write this book?
A couple of years. Started it was a kind of a pandemic project where
right. You're going to be locked in anyway.
And Jean, my wife, has been pushing for this for a while. That she said, you kind of have to write this book, and so the pandemic actually, when you're forced to not move around, it gives you some time to work on things like this.
Right, but the movement itself, the rise of the rest. Where did it start? Like, what is on the most granular level? Like, what city did it start in, or how?
The first city.
And then, of course, what was your first win along the way that made you feel like
keep
well,
going.
this is worth
keep
doing.
going.
Yeah, keep going.
Well, in
exactly.
fairness, the first tour we did this bus tour. We got a bus and kind of Americana road trip kind of thing, and so let's just pick a few cities and spend time there and send an advanced team there, and then meet entrepreneurs there and try to figure out what's happening there and do a pitch competition, and then pick at least one company to invest in. But we didn't really know exactly what was going to happen. So the first stop of the first tour was in Detroit.
Okay.
And Detroit is an interesting city because 100 years ago, it was sort of Silicon Valley. It was the most innovative city at the time because the car was the technology of the day and everybody wanted to be part of the car revolution, so they wanted to move to Detroit. It was booming for decades. But when Detroit was growing, and Silicon Valley 100 years ago essentially was fruit orchards. It was agriculture, not technology. And then something happened where Detroit kind of lost its way, and in 50 years lost 60% of its population. And the year before we rolled in with our Rise the Rest bus, the city of Detroit went bankrupt.
Jeez.
And so we said, let's start there, see what's happening there. I was just back there last week, on last Monday, and in the last decade, things have really accelerated. The things that are happening now in Detroit are quite encouraging. In fact, a number of companies there, including Shinola, which makes watches, and StockX, which is a stock exchange for things. Each of those companies didn't exist 10 years ago, now have thousands of employees between them. So it shows you what's possible in terms of backing these companies and the impact it can have on the cities like Detroit.
Yeah. How long were you in? I guess I knew you were on a bus. How'd that work? Like, who's driving the bus and who's in the bus?
It was not me. It was.
No, I knew you weren't, but I didn't think you were driving.
People did actually question whether I was actually on the bus. Are you actually on the bus?
I think you were.
Of course I'm on the bus.
Yeah.
No, it's fun. It was so what we basically kind of leased one of the buses that are used for music tours and things like that, and and just spent most of the day driving around the city, seeing what's happening, introduce people to each other, because one of the things we've been really trying to focus is drive more collaboration at that local level, get the entrepreneurs working with the big companies, working with the universities.
So you'd land in the middle of Detroit, and you'd plant your bus, and people started to learn that you were investing in.
Well, they knew we were coming to town. Because there's some publicity, and we got the entrepreneur there, Dan Gilbert, who's done a lot in the city, including rebuilding a lot of downtown, and brought his company Quicken Loans from the suburbs into downtown.
And that's 15 years ago?
What's that? That was 8 years ago.
8 years ago. Okay.
And then the mayor was there, the governor was there. Met with the major car companies that were there. So when we come, we really try to get everybody together and use it as an opportunity to celebrate what the entrepreneurs are doing and spotlight some of them. And part of the reason even to use the bus, you'd appreciate this, given your background, is it allows us to tell these stories of these cities and these entrepreneurs. And so, a few years ago, 60 Minutes followed us around for a while and did something on it. So it was just a way to get the story out that while it makes sense to celebrate the entrepreneurs in places like Silicon Valley or New York or some of these other places, there are entrepreneurs in other parts of the country that don't get that spotlight, that don't get that attention, that are building kind of remarkable companies and creating a huge number of jobs. There's one in particular that I wrote about in the book in eastern Kentucky, kind of what's known as kind of Appalachia coal country, that has had a tough run for the last few decades.
Right.
Sort of a sense of hopelessness. A lot of people feel like they have to leave. There's no opportunity there. There's a big opioid problem. And entrepreneur Jonathan Webb had the idea to create essentially an agriculture technology company, and has now built the largest indoor greenhouse in the country. And it uses 90% less water, so it's good for the planet. And their location is 70% of the U.S. population is within a 24-hour drive of that location. And when they first came and pitched it, it was a risky idea, but we thought it was intriguing, so we made an initial seed investment. He's gone on to raise several $100 million, and now has over 500 employees in an area in eastern Kentucky which hasn't seen any new jobs, new company creation in a long while. That's the kind of stories that I wanted to
Wow.
kind of get out there.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. In Kentucky, as that worked, did that spawn other entrepreneurs in Kentucky?
Yeah,
specifically?
what happens, and we've seen it now in a bunch of cities, even here in Los Angeles, the startup sector has really picked up
Right,
steam
like
in the
in
last
Venice,
decade.
California,
Because
Santa
of the
Monica.
success of Snapchat, some other things that,
Yeah.
that sort of surprise people. It's like, wow, this is like thought this would be in Silicon Valley. That
Right.
inspires other people to start things, that inspires other people to invest in things, that inspires people to move
And when
there.
you see things working, then
Yeah, and
you think it
you-
can work for you.
Exactly.
It,
So it kind of
validates
success
your
begets
hope.
success, and
Yeah.
momentum begets momentum, and so that does happen in these different cities. We call it sort of these tentpole companies that really show the city what's possible, and then the success of that does lead some of the people part of that company might start another company, or maybe they'll invest in some other company,
Right.
and you just get this momentum, building, which is what created Silicon Valley. We just need to, build that kind of momentum in more parts of the country.
Now, I should know this, but I don't. How much time did you spend in Silicon Valley?
I never lived there. I visited there a lot, but
But did you rely upon VCs there to help you at all?
yeah,
or to
when we
work with
started
you?
AOL, there was no VCs really in the area where we were living, with Northern Virginia, kind of outside of Washington,
Yeah, I wouldn't
D.C.
think, yeah.
So we had to go to San Francisco, we had to go to Chicago, we had to go to Boston, we went to Toronto to raise the initial money to launch
Right.
the company. There was no venture capital. What's the positive news in the last decade? 1,400 new venture capital firms have started up in these rise of the rest cities outside
Wow.
of San Francisco, New York, Boston. 1,400. So now in most parts of the country, there are more access to capital for entrepreneurs than existed even 10 years ago. So I think that's encouraging.
That's really encouraging. So that in each one of these cities or towns where there's rise of the rest, that means there's funding there.
Yeah, we provide
Some
some
funding.
but what we also are doing is co-investing with the local investors, because we're really trying to create this network across the country.
Right.
So we're kind of trying to be a catalyst and shine a spotlight on it, but we really rely on the investors in Indianapolis or Baltimore or Detroit or many of these other cities to take the lead in investing and in helping to support these companies. Then we can invest as well alongside them and connect them in a broader network.
Right. So some of this, when I read the book, and there's a lot of cases there that sort of help you, if you're wondering, how do I do this? There is sort of a how-to quality that lives inside this book. So in the case of, what are some of the stories of the big, of the wins that you feel were valuable or substantive to the movement itself?
There's a bunch. I'll just give you a few. There's an entrepreneur in Chicago whose wife 7 years ago was diagnosed with breast cancer. Talked to half a dozen different doctors, different hospitals, got half a dozen different answers in terms of what they should do, which is kind of scary that there was so many differences. So he decided to start a company. Said this kind of data problem is sort of an analysis problem. It's a company called Tempus to solve that problem. So that when people are diagnosed initially with cancer, now they're focused on other diseases, it's much more precise in terms of what exactly is going on, and therefore it can be much more precise in terms of what the intervention should be. That company, which started with that idea 7 years ago, has over 1,000 employees, raised $1 billion. It's becoming one of the significant health tech companies,
Right.
and has the potential to revolutionize healthcare. That would not have happened if his wife hadn't been diagnosed with breast cancer and he hadn't experienced this. Another one, there was a mom outside of Indianapolis, a suburb of Indianapolis,
Yeah.
who was concerned about water quality because of the Flint, Michigan water crisis, which was in the news and not too far from Indianapolis. So she called her water company, said, I want to get my water tested. I'm a little worried about it. And the water company said, well, we don't do that. We don't test water for consumers.
Yeah, it's a pretty hopeless situation there.
And so she said, well, that's not right, and started a company to do water testing. And now it's gone from just testing it for families to even cities like San Francisco has licensed their technology. So again, personal experience, in this case, a concerned mom, concerned about water quality, and said, I'm going to go do something about it. There's another company in Chattanooga that built a kind of a Bloomberg-like data platform for the trucking industry. I didn't know this, our bus was in Chattanooga, but some of the biggest trucking companies in America are headquartered in Chattanooga. So if you're building that company, there's no better place to be than Chattanooga. So as we've traveled around, we've just seen dozens of these examples of really hundreds of these examples of ideas that somebody had. Basically, entrepreneurs see a problem in their lives. They say, that doesn't make sense, or that could be done better. And then takes the next step and says, I'm going to go do something about it. I'm going to start a company.
Right.
And trying to give more people in more places that opportunity. And then once they decide to take that leap, surrounding them with resources so they're more likely to be successful is what Rise the Rest is all about.
Yeah. Again, this is a little granular, but when an individual has an idea and they're going to be the entrepreneur that's going to drive that idea in any of these obscure places, where do they find or harvest their engineers? How does that work?
Well, part of what we're trying to address is most, the idea of creativity and talent, ideas are pretty equally distributed around the country and around the world, but opportunity is not. And if you're in a city where there's not a strong startup community, there's not venture capital, I think, you're more likely to leave. I was at a meeting in Silicon Valley maybe 4 years ago, about 2,000 people in the audience, and I asked for a show of hands, how many people were born and raised in the Bay Area? It's like less than 5%. Essentially everybody in Silicon Valley is from someplace else. So it starts with creating more vibrancy in these communities so that there's less of a brain drain of people leaving and more of a boomerang of people returning. The second piece is figuring out how do you tap into, in this case, you mentioned engineering resources, both locally and increasingly you can access people in other places who can do some of that. And the pandemic has accelerated that. There are clearly a lot more people that are working remotely, and you don't necessarily have to be have everybody in the same office. That allows the entrepreneurs in these Rise the Rest cities to tap into talent that's all around the country, and also allows people who may choose to work for a company in a big city, but actually would rather live in some other place to now kind of have the ability to be part of that company, even if they're living someplace else.
And now, so, because I'm also an author,
I know.
The book is a relative synthesis of your 8 years that you've been doing this, right?
Right.
And so writing a book is hard. Why did you decide you'd write a book that you'd go out and promote and that stand behind? And I think everybody should get this book, actually. It's a really great book, and for me, it was a how-to book and it was valuable.
Well, I think it's probably a little bit how you think about your work in making movies. To me, it was a story that needed to be told.
Okay.
I had the opportunity.
Compelled to do that.
I felt compelled to write it. I felt compelled to champion
to share
these
your
entrepreneurs and spotlight, showcase some of these cities and the work they're doing to kind of create more jobs and economic vitality. And I think it's a very, at least my take is, it's a very optimistic view of the future of America. There's a lot of things that are, divide us. The idea of creating more opportunity for more people in more places, the idea of supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs, no matter where they happen to be, is one of the few things that does, people come together on. So hopefully it will inspire more people to start companies. Hopefully it will inspire more people to back those companies, support those companies, whether it be as investors or customers or mentors or whatever way people can contribute. And hopefully it will help level the playing field so that it really is a more inclusive innovation economy, not just a few people in a few places like Silicon Valley doing well, a lot of people in a lot of places, feeling left out and left behind. There's another data point too that is also should get people's attention that we're trying to deal with. I mentioned 75% of venture capital goes to 3 states. If you go beyond place to people, women are 50% of the population. Mm-hmm. Female founders get less than 10% of venture capital. Black Americans are 13% of the population. Black founders get less than 1% of venture capital. So it's a broader problem of we're trying to kind of level the playing field and give more people in more places an opportunity to kind of pursue the American dream.
Mm-hmm. Also, by this working so well, as it continues to work, it's a unifier, isn't it? And because it sort of says we all have, if we really dig into our own personal resources, and we work together to solve problems, it's unifying, and it sort of says that we're, just human beings, part of the human species, and it's beyond and above any kind of politics. It's just, it's almost like faith itself.
No, I agree. I think there's something optimistic about creators, pioneers, entrepreneurs. And I think it's worth remembering, I talk about it in the book, that 250 years ago, America itself was a startup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was just an idea. And like many startups, the United States of America almost crashed, almost hit the wall several times, but sort of got through that initial startup phase, and then now is the leader of the free world, because in large part we have the leading economy in the world. And that didn't just pop up. That was entrepreneurs creating companies and industries, the agricultural revolution we led, the industrial revolution we led, more recently the technology, the digital revolution we led. And that allowed us to go from this fragile startup nation to this leader. And so that's kind of how we got to now. How do we continue to lead? We've got to continue to innovate. And we've got to do that in a more inclusive way. Otherwise, this divide in our country will get worse.
Yeah.
It's already pretty bad. So I don't know if we want to get worse.
Bad.
How do we reverse that? I think part of the answer is trying to create more opportunity by backing more entrepreneurs in more places. So it's not just about any one company or any one city, or it's really a broader thesis around how to create a more united States of America.
Is your greater opinion of these startups, certainly they're to solve a problem, but do you think the greater opinion is that they're usually good problems? I mean, they're worthy problems.
Yeah, there's some. I get a lot of pitches. Some are worthier than others, but I think right now entrepreneurs are able to tackle.
Just like there's good movies and bad movies.
Exactly. None of yours are always good movies.
Oh, always, every time.
No, I think in some ways my experience in the early days of the internet with AOL and other companies like that was just trying to get America online, getting the world online. Mm-hmm. In the last couple of decades, we've kind of had this phase where, because the internet was built, you didn't have to build the infrastructure or the on-ramps, it was all there. You're building software apps on top of the internet, Facebook, Google, things like that, and those proved to be very, very important. But now we're where the next phase is kind of where the internet meets the real world, and the internet can improve healthcare. I mentioned that example in Chicago. It can help improve industries like financial services and learning and food and agriculture. Arguably the most important things in our lives: how we stay healthy, how we move around, how we learn, how we invest, what we eat, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where I'm confident that entrepreneurs will come up with better ideas, better approaches, better products, better services, but only if we're backing a wide variety of entrepreneurs in a wide variety of places. That kind of maximizes the shots on goal for America. Right.
And if you're, given the people in the audience or the people that are watching this virtually, what do you want aspiring entrepreneurs to learn from the book?
One, if you have an idea, you see a problem, maybe now's the time to do something about it. Instead of just thinking about it, do something about it. Two, wherever you live, don't assume that you have to be someplace else in order to start a company.
Wow. So you have to move.
Start where you are. And number three, figure out ways to connect within your community to some of the other people, whether it be other entrepreneurs or potential investors, that might help take your idea and kind of give it scale. And maybe you'll decide, if you're in some part of the country, you want to be in some other part of the country, like the Silicon Valley, which is fine. But you shouldn't feel like you have to be there in order to be taken seriously, in order to have access to capital, in order to really start and scale a company. That's, I think, the key message. And it's been building over the last decade. And as I said, the pandemic has kind of been a tipping point where a lot of people are taking a step back, kind of rethinking how they want to live, where they want to live, how they want to work, where they want to work. And that's creating a new sense of possibility for a lot of people. And that's going to lead to a wave of innovation, I think, all across the country.
Beyond that, if you're not an aspiring entrepreneur and you read the book, is there a personal lesson you're trying to impart, or did you think you might have covered that, or is there a lesson or a message or something that's for the civilian that's not, desirous of being an entrepreneur?
Of course, not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur, but I think everybody has.
Because some people actually have to do the job, have to work, right, for the entrepreneur.
Yeah, the entrepreneurs do some work as well.
And they can do better than the entrepreneur, possibly.
Yeah, no, and entrepreneurship is a team sport. It's definitely, in some ways, we celebrate the entrepreneur, the CEO, the founder too much, and the teams they build to take that idea and run with it is hugely important. So I'd say the broader lesson goes back to what I said about this arc of the American story, is that we're at a moment. There's some people who do worry that America has lost its way and that China is going to be winning in new technologies, AI, robotics, things like that. And there are risks in terms of what's happening with global competition. But if we're kind of double down on entrepreneurs, double down on new ideas, double down on trying to reimagine some of the big industries, there is an opportunity for America to continue to lead. And if we do that in a more inclusive way, there's an opportunity for more of these cities, more of these states to show momentum. And that will, I think, help, as I said before, help deal, at least in part. It's not going to be the magic bullet, but at least in part to this divide we have in this country. There was a survey, Pew did it about 4 years ago, and it said that 70% of Americans wake up in the morning anxious and fearful about the future. They feel like they're
70%.
70%, the majority of people. And they feel like we talk about technology and disruption and so forth. It's not helping them. Maybe hurting them. Maybe that technology disruption is actually killing a job in their family or in their community. So they're nervous. They're worried. They feel like the next chapter for their family, for their community is going to be worse, not better.
Yeah.
We've got to reverse that. We've got to reverse that. And I think that requires creating that jobs, hope, opportunity in more places, and that requires backing more entrepreneurs in more places because they are the big job creators. And obviously many startups fail. It doesn't quite work out. But the ones that succeed, create tons of jobs. The next week I'll be in Bentonville, Arkansas, and there was a entrepreneur there 50 years ago, Sam Walton, who said, I think people living in rural areas have stores with limited selection and high prices. I'm going to figure out a way to give them broad selection at lower prices with greater convenience and open like one store.
It's amazing.
And open second store and third store. And now Walmart is the largest company in the world. And,
Yeah.
got a couple million employees and
Yeah.
just an entrepreneur in Northwest Arkansas who said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to build it. This is, if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, they all
They're
started
largely-
as startups.
yeah,
and
they
most
did.
of them started as what most people thought were stupid ideas.
Yeah.
Let me pitch this to you.
Usually
I'm going to start a
outcasts.
company that's going to get people to rent a couch in their house to a stranger.
Yeah.
And people say, well, that'll never work because number one, nobody's going to let a stranger in their house. Number two, no stranger will
dangerous.
want to live, in
Yeah.
somebody else's house.
Yeah.
Well, that was the genesis of Airbnb,
Yes.
which is now the largest hospitality company in the world, bigger than Hilton and Marriott
Isn't that
combined.
crazy? Yeah.
And that pitch 15 years or so ago, most people would have thought was insane.
Yeah.
So, so you have to give these ideas just again, like your little life, get a little bit momentum, and some things end up turning into big successes, kind of like the movie business. Others kind of falter, but you've got to kind of get more things
Encourage
in motion.
people.
And
Yeah.
encourage people.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely an optimist, and you've done really hard things. I mean, AOL was a really hard thing. And I know that's, of course, in your past and you're on to the future, and that's this. So I think the book is great because it is so encouraging and so optimistic and practical for that matter. So it made me more enthusiastic about some of the things that I'm working on other than the movies that I'm doing.
Like what?
I'm going to do an ed tech idea that I pitched you already.
I know. That's a great idea.
No, I know. And then with the upcoming election, how does that interface with policy that could affect the entrepreneur, or how do you see that?
It could affect in a lot of different ways. I think one thing that's encouraging, there's some things that are discouraging, but one thing that's encouraging is most states and cities, the mayors, when they thought of economic development 10 years ago, it was almost exclusively, how do we get a big company to move? Their headquarters or open a factory or something. It was all about the big companies. And more recently, the shift has been about how do we create an environment to support the launch of new companies, which is a much more kind of sustainable strategy. So that's a positive. Also, some of the legislation that passed, including a number of things that have passed in a bipartisan way in the last several months, will be helpful. And one in particular is part of something called the Chips and Science Act, authorized $10 billion to fund the development of more regional hubs, which ties in directly with the Rise the Rest thesis. So I think that is really going to be quite helpful. So hopefully, even though these battles in election, including sounds like
Our mayor,
right here,
who's going to be the mayor?
Mayor,
Los Angeles.
get a lot of attention, and things end up getting super partisan. Hopefully, whoever wins, there'll be more of this focus on the future and more of this focus on kind of supporting new companies and figuring out ways to use that to do a better job of many aspects of our communities, our society, and also create more vitality. So there is more of that opportunity.
So there are three big cities that we talked about, and then what are the ones that are now much more popular than they've ever, or what are the cities or towns that have been birthed since this? I know Austin's.
No, there's a bunch.
There's a bunch.
The reason, again, part of the reason to write the book is 30 different cities we talk about.
Okay.
Most people think about, Austin gets a lot of attention, deservedly, in Seattle and Los Angeles more recently. But they're really, this Rise the Rest phenomenon is not just about a few new cities, it's actually a few dozen cities, and that's I think what mostly will surprise people. And when people come with us on some of these tours, because we invite people to join our bus from different places, they're always shocked by what's happening, including people who originally were in those communities but left to go to someplace else, and when they come back, it's like, I had no idea there was this kind of things, all these different things happening. So I think this really will be a much, kind of broader-based phenomenon than most people, realize.
Yeah. When you hear ideas, when people pitch you or pitch your company, what do you judge? The intentionality, the mission, the founder, the ability, seemingly a quick judgment on their ability to execute? How do you?
That's a pretty good summary.
Oh, okay.
No, it starts with the idea, sort of, is it an interesting idea? Is it an important idea? Is it like
Is it important? Can it be an important
battle
idea?
worth fighting? Kind of a mountain worth climbing? Something that if they're successful, it's going to have a significant impact and has the opportunity to build a significant, company. Second, obviously, is the entrepreneur and the team. As it goes back to what I said before about the team sport. Do they have the ability not just to see a different version of the future, but make it happen? So the execution, part is hugely important. Some evidence that there is what we call in our world product market fit. This idea somebody has some, some evidence that it's working, and even if it's just in a kind of a modest way, there's some evidence that it's working. Another area that's increasingly important is they have a theory of how partnerships could accelerate it. So that's not just what they do, what other organizations could they, like in healthcare, for example, the actual idea or the actual technology is kind of like the table stakes. It's important, but the real value is created by the partnerships you form with hospitals or health plans or others that really, take that idea and scale it. So those are some of the things that we look at. And we also are investors at the very early stage, sort of the seed stage, at the venture stage when it's a little bit more developed, and at the later stage, kind of the growth stage. And obviously you look at things differently depending on whether it's a really early, fragile idea, it's got some traction, or it really is starting to grow faster.
What was the pitch on AOL?
Well, the pitch on AOL, and it seems crazy now. The introduction mentioned that when we started, only 3% of people. I see that only 3% of people were online, and they were online 1 hour a week. So the pitch was, someday everybody will be on the internet.
Right.
And someday that will change how we get information and how we learn and how we buy products and how we communicate. And because only 3% were on, most people thought it was just a niche-y computer hobbyist thing, and never would be a big idea. So the way we dealt with it, going back to your earlier question, is we said, here's how here's specifically the product that we're going to develop for a particular home computer. It could be a Commodore, it could be an Apple, it could be IBM, but a specific thing that worked just for that computer. And we built partnerships with those computer companies to be able to scale these, the business. So it was a way to convince people that there was a path to build a larger business, and that we were kind of de-risking it by building these partnerships. But we did have one difficult moment, which is I moved in 1987, 1988. I moved to the San Francisco area for 6 months and went to Apple's headquarters every day for 6 months, every single day. And after about 3 months, the security guard felt so sorry for me that he actually gave me a pass.
Clearance.
A clearance pass, so I wouldn't have to check in every day. And what I was doing is wandering around the company, trying to find somebody to say yes to a partnership. And eventually we got a partnership to license the Apple brand name, which they'd never done before, and created a service called Apple Personal Edition.
Oh my God.
And we launched that. And then 2 years into it, Apple decided,
if I want it back.
That was a mistake. We shouldn't have licensed our brand name. I don't think they've done it since. And so they decided to tear up that contract and pay us, a couple $1 million to kind of go away. Which was a crisis, because that was like the big thing we were focused on.
Yeah.
But because we couldn't call it Apple Inc. anymore, we had to call it something else. And we basically had a little internal contest. And one of the candidates was called Online America. And I said, well, that's good, but I think America Online just sounds better. And so we took that and ripped the Apple Inc. name off and put on the America Online name. And out of what seemed like a crisis that could have killed the company,
Right.
that actually ended up
Accelerated
being an accelerant
it.
that built the company.
Amazing.
And so one of the lessons is sometimes what looks like a crisis can be an opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. That's interesting. I never knew that story. Well, look, I love the book. I thought it was, I think I really admire the nobility of the mission. There's no question about that. But I also saw a lot of practical use for myself and for others, and my kids will be reading it. It's a great book. So I think these are all the questions I have for you for right now.
All right, I think there's some questions from
Okay.
the audience.
Okay?
While you're thinking your questions, I'm going to go to one that came from one of our virtual attendees. It says, would you comment about all the startup activity around the cannabis industry?
Oh, that's good.
Do you consider these as rising? Have you
Yes.
spoken to any? Are there any in the book?
There are not any in the book, but it is a example of, which we're going to see more of, a change in policy, a change in regulations, whether it be at a state level or at a national level, can open up opportunities. And that's an example of something that wasn't really possible 10 years ago, but became possible on a kind of a state-by-state basis. And now it's a very significant area of investment in many states around the country. And that's one of the things entrepreneurs should be doing, is looking for what changes in the context or the environment, the rules of the road, might create opportunities that might exist in the future but didn't exist in the past, and kind of position themselves to be kind of early movers when those rules change. And you're seeing that more and more in different sectors. Some more obvious, like healthcare, and even with the pandemic, suddenly you saw a real acceleration in telemedicine because people couldn't visit doctors, and so even though it was not allowed in many different contexts, suddenly it had to be allowed, and a lot of those rules are becoming more permanent. As a result, you've seen a huge acceleration in the telemedicine area. So looking for those changes that are either happening now or you think are going to happen in the not too distant future, and positioning yourself for those is a great strategy for entrepreneurs.
Gentlemen, I have great appreciation for both of you. I've listened to both of you in the past. I have two very important questions. First one is for Steve. Steve, I noticed in the introduction that the person who was introducing you said you were one of the founders of DraftKings. So my question to you is the proposition coming up in the forthcoming election on gambling good for the state of California?
So what was the question?
The question is
gambling
the
good?
proposition coming up for a vote in the forthcoming election good for the state of California, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I was not a founder of DraftKings, but we did invest in DraftKings when it was a private company, and no longer have an interest in it after it went to be a public company. I did, part of it goes back to the earlier question, we did, when we invested, think that there was a change afoot, and the Supreme Court did rule that gave states the right to make the decisions around gaming, and a number of states have done that, and I think in general it's been a positive. I don't know exactly what's being considered in California, though.
And Brian, I've seen so many of your movies and have enjoyed them so much. So my very important question to you is, are you still playing hockey?
Am I still playing what?
Hockey.
Hockey.
I don't play hockey.
I thought you did.
Jerry Bruckheimer plays hockey.
Thank you.
But he does. He plays hockey, and there's times that people have congratulated me on his movies, and there's times that he's been congratulated for a movie that I made.
I hear you're a really good hockey player. That's the word.
No, I mean, I surf.
Mr. Case, I was a stockholder in America Online, and I believed that was the future. Got my rear end handed to me in 2001, I believe, and really bad. And then Google came, and I said, nah, Google's not going to go anywhere. I still have my AOL account, by the way. But
Thank you.
what happened? Innovation? What? I'm still trying to understand why America Online was there at the beginning, but now
It's a great question.
people say, amateurs online, you still have that?
No, it's a great question. I think it's the arc of the rise and fall of companies, which is one of the things that entrepreneurs are particularly trying to figure out how to deal with, because that can create new opportunities. So the way I look at the AOL story is, as we said, when we started, nobody knew about the internet, and we built a pretty significant company. It was the first internet company to go public. At our peak around 2000, half of all the internet traffic in the United States went through AOL, and the company had been, gone from essentially worth nothing to worth $160 billion, going pretty well. We merged with Time Warner, which strategically made a lot of sense given the leadership we had in the internet, the leadership that Time Warner had, and not just media and communication, but also the largest broadband plant. And so it should have been the perfect deal and should have led the way with some of the things that we now know about and use, Netflix and Spotify and so forth. But the execution of that merger, and Brian obviously had some visibility into it as well, was terrible. And so to me, the lesson was, and Thomas Edison said this 100 years ago, vision without execution is hallucination. The idea of these companies was powerful, which is why AT&T and Microsoft and News Corp and all these companies marched on Washington to block it, because they didn't think they could compete with this combined company. But internal tensions and not getting aligned around strategy and so forth ended up resulting in missing a lot of those opportunities, and AOL going from being dominant to being, I wouldn't call it irrelevant, but certainly not a major factor. So it's the arc of these things, and you just have to make sure as entrepreneurs you're constantly leaning into the future, and that we ceased doing that after that merger to a large extent.
A question from the virtual audience, another one, and then I'll come to the gentleman in the middle here. It says, I heard Peter Thiel at Live Talks LA, and he talked about an initiative to dissuade entrepreneurs from going to college and supporting them to bypass college. What are your thoughts on that?
Peter is an interesting guy, and he has interesting ideas and been very successful with many of those ideas. I don't think everybody needs to go to college, for sure. And there are some people that are part of what he called the Thiel Fellows that did, not go to college, or in some cases drop out of college, who've gone on to be very successful. But I don't think it's particularly helpful to encourage everybody to, say you don't really need to, go to college. For some, it makes sense. For others, maybe it doesn't make sense. It's not just what you learn; it's also the network of people you come into contact with that can help shape your views, but also help down the road potentially help you on different initiatives.
We have time for two more questions.
Hey guys, this is amazing. My name is Hanif. I'm a son of a fisherman who sold his boats and built the movie theaters. I'm inspired by movies, and being an artist, I wanted to open a production company / art center. As an immigrant, I have a question regarding immigrant. You talked about your frustration about immigration reform, how complicated, and immigration is in itself a very complicated issue, but also people who are doing everything right, legal immigrants who are literally being deported for just being born in a specific country. I know there's an officer who was sentenced for 24th month for fraud. At least I know one case that he deported someone, false deportation proceedings, for no reason. So these are the gatekeepers that we immigrants have to deal with, who are basically stopping a good energy coming into America, who could be good for, I understand the frustration divide, but we could be helpful. In the book you talked about that, it frustrates you. So could you elaborate a little bit more what else needs to be done from both sides?
Yeah, no, I recognize immigration is complicated, multifaceted, and also can be sensitive and even emotional for a lot of people. But I just look at the data, and particularly around entrepreneurship, the role immigrant founders have played is just clear as day. And about 40% of the successful tech companies in Silicon Valley have immigrant founders, for example. And part of what has made America, the country it is is being this magnet that attracted people from all around the world who had this pioneering spirit, wanted to, create things and take risks and so forth. So I do worry that as we've had this political, kind of gridlock really around immigration, that it's made it harder for people to come, made it harder for people in our universities to stay, and that does create real risk in terms of America's ability to continue to lead in a much more global world. So I've been pretty active on this. 8 or 9 years ago, I testified in the Senate around immigration reform. This summer, we came close to getting something including in legislation around something called the startup visa, which would be a step in the right direction. But if America loses its way, some of that will be because of what we talked about, where we're not backing a variety of entrepreneurs in a variety of places, only certain people in certain places. But another potential reason, if we do, lose our lead, is that we cease being this magnet for talent from all around the world that wants to start and build companies here that create jobs here. And so I do think it's important. Hopefully, it will get some resolution soon.
And our final question for the evening.
Hi, so I'm over here in the corner. Brian and Steve, thank you both for being here. I'm looking forward to the book. So as a Latina who's both a creative and an entrepreneur, one thing that I am navigating is these waters of balance. And I would love to ask you both what your morning routine is. How do you balance both the entrepreneur side as well as having your family? And with Steve, I have to ask you, who thought of Who Got Mail?
Want to start on your routine?
My wake-up routine, what do I do?
Your morning routine. How do you kick off your day?
Okay. I get up, read around 6 o'clock. At 6:45, I meet my trainer in our gym, work out for about an hour. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I play tennis right after that. This doesn't answer your entrepreneurship, does it?
But I'm impressed so far. I don't want to follow this.
Yeah. So that begins the routine, and then I read and listen to a few listen to little pieces of podcasts, and then I look at my main business, which is making movies, television, documentaries, all sizes and shapes of, various content, streaming movies, theatrical movies, and I like to invent in that world. So I like to think about, well, I hate to say this, but what's the white space? What's the thing that other people aren't doing, but a big subject? I look for big subjects. Or at least, and I look for universal themes like love, family, parenthood. I look for other universal themes like self-respect, which is kind of almost everything. Friday Night Lights was about self-respect. American Gangster was about self-respect. That was like the driving force of it. And then I do have other businesses. I invest a little bit, and I have a few other things that are entrepreneurship and that I don't want to identify, but I do that, and that's sort of how I do it.
Not much to add to that, other than I'm not nearly as disciplined in my morning routine around the workouts and the tennis as Brian, particularly in the last couple of weeks when you're doing a book tour. It's not.
Yeah, well, that's your.
But I do find it's important, which builds on your question, builds on Brian's answer, especially when you're really busy, to find some time to disconnect, some time to take a step back. And for me, walking, running, hiking sometimes is a way to do that. Being kind of nature, I think, helps. Being kind of away from the world, I think helps. And a lot of ideas, perspectives, things come to me kind of through that. And also recognize that there's certain chapters, there's certain cadence, almost like you're a surfer. There's certain kind of waves that come and go, and you just have to kind of take the long view, and sometimes you do have to, kind of really double down, even triple down, and other times where you just need to, kind of back off or focus on other things. And the second part of your question in terms of You've Got Mail, that actually came by a little bit by accident, that we were in the relatively early days of AOL, just trying to figure out some way to put a more human touch on this technology that most people found a little scary and forbidding. And, you know, we take it for granted now, but people just like thought it was kind of weird and scary. And so we said, well, one way we can do it is to make people feel more comfortable. And so we did a lot of things to make the software easier to use, so that made it more comfortable. I sent an email to everybody who joined, kind of almost like I was the mayor of the city, welcoming to the community. That made people more comfortable. And we decided to add voices to the software. This is when, you know, still the communication speed were really slow, so you couldn't really transmit it, but we loaded it onto the software and things like You've Got Mail and Welcome and so forth. And the way that got done is I was wandering, we only had like 40 people in the company at the time, and I was in the customer service area talking about this idea. I feel like we should figure out some way to make it more human and add some voices. And the software engineer said, well, you could do it if we did this and so forth. And a woman, Karen Edwards, one of the customer service people, overheard me talking about this and said, like, my husband, Elwood, does radio stuff. And if you want, I could ask him to, you know, kind of say a bunch of things and record them on, like, so I wrote down a little piece of paper, You've Got Mail, Welcome, and so forth. She took it home. He, you know, read into, you know, a cassette recorder, brought the little cassette tape back. We had the engineers add it to the software. And, you know, a few years later, he was one of the most famous voices in the world. And it was completely accidental.
Wow,
'cause,
that's
you know,
amazing.
Karen happened to hear me, and Elwood happened to be her husband, who had a pretty good You've Got Mail voice.
That's right. That's great.
Well, thank you, everybody.